Rose steps out of her car, pushing the door open, accompanied by her white gloves. We see her hat move upwards, parallel to her eyeline. We see her striped dress and a stunning hat that rims over her head. Do you remember of the movie Titanic? Some of you may remember the luscious fashions in the movie, but how well do you know of it? Hi, my name is Tunsaringkran, and today I will be talking about the fashions of the 1910s. I'm an amateur fashion historian. I collect antique paper media from the 1800s all the way to the 1900s and have been researching Western women's fashion for an estimate of 5 years. The purpose of this is to acknowledge how did people dress back in the 1910s and perhaps see some repetition in fashion trends. You may think, how is this important to us in the present? It enhances our ability to understand and see how people lived that lead to historic events. First, I will talk about how World War I affected women's clothing. Secondly, I will talk about the day-to-day women's fashion. And finally, the designers of the said period. You may ask yourself, why was the war influential to the fashion? World War I was the event that made fashion more practical for Westerners, especially women. World War I happened in Europe from 1914 to 1918. The United States were allies of a few European countries, therefore sent American soldiers to participate in the war. World War I meant that women started to take over jobs intended for men. Some of the jobs they took were in the line of fire. According to Tae-H Kim, who wrote the article where women worked during World War I for the University of Washington Seattle General Strike Project, women found employment in Women's Land Army, on farms, ammunition factories, and aid. Working women often wore khaki uniforms and sometimes overalls, whilst keeping the signature 1910 silhouette. The aforementioned 1910s signature woman silhouette will be discussed momentarily. Women's fashions were quite restrictive. However, they were spectacles. The corsetry was a main source of restriction, such as how the corset cinched below the bust instead of the waist, which were similar to the Regency era. The book, The History of Modern Fashion, written by Cole Daniel James and Nancy Deal, says that the corset would usually give the woman an S-curve. Women's labor-intensive jobs, because of the war, meant that some women started to ditch the corsets. The layers of fabric social norms expected them to wear were great in number. Even in hot weather, they were expected to wear clothes that covered the knees with all of those layers. Lingerie, also known as undergarments in that period, were often quite lengthy and evening gown-like, as can be seen here. Although clothing may be restrictive, they were accessorized to maximum glamour. They wore hats that usually brims over their heads, such as the Merry Widow hat. Brims of said hats could be seen stretching over the body's shoulders. Bows and plumes accessorize the hat. Plume is another word for bird feathers or bird taxidermy. Some bird species became endangered and even went into an extinction. Women also had to wear gloves, usually long-sleeved, and to keep the state of purity, often were white. Women wore shoes that had laces in the fronts and heels that were curvy with a relatively big heel bottom surface area. The shoes resembled earlier decades. So how did the women know where to get their outfits? Women found the trendiest of fashions in women's magazines and general newspapers, such as Cosmopolitan, Ladies' Home Journal, the New York Times, Harper's Weekly, American Magazine. Designers in and off New York, Paris, London, and perhaps Chicago were the most popular. The French fashion house Chanel started in 1910, which first created sportswear, gowns, and hats. One of the most prominent designers were Lady Duff Gordon, who went by Lucille. She was a British fashion and costume designer of lingerie and famously standardized her draping techniques. She designed for the play Merry Widow in London, which was how the hat came about, the Merry Widow hat. She was also famous for her survival of the Titanic and was depicted on screen in the present-day film as well. Today, we have covered how World War I affected women's clothing, the matter of restraints yet immense beauty of women's fashion, and the how and where women in the 1910s could have achieved their fashions. The movie Titanic was the reason of how present mass audiences became enthusiastic about fashion history, especially of the 1910s. After listening to my presentation on American women's fashion of the 1910s, can you identify whether or not Rosa's outfit in the Titanic film is historically accurate? Thank you for listening.